Imagine standing right next to someone when they just disappear. One moment they're there, and the next they've vanished, and you're left just staring at where they had just stood, thinking maybe you're dreaming or going insane. These cases do actually happen, and they've haunted witnesses, family members, and researchers for generations. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Danny. I explore all kinds of mysteries from aliens to paranormal stories to unexplained phenomena. If you are new to Wicked Mysterious, welcome. And if you are not new, I assume you probably found me through the Gate series. So thank you so much for checking out some of my other content. I do love to explore all kinds of mysteries. So if you have a suggestion, please let me know. Today's topic actually comes from a channel member. His name is JP Pryor, and he recommended this topic. We actually share a favorite topic, which is strange disappearances. So today we're going to be talking about some historical glitch in the matrix stories where people disappear into thin air. So before we get started, if you'd like to support the channel, check out the links below. I do have some downloadable PDFs to teach you how to see auras or how to astral project. And I do have my conscious creation course coming very, very soon. Sign up for the waiting list if you're interested in working with me. So with all that out of the way, let's get to today's mystery. So again, today on Glitch in the Matrix, we're diving into the strange, kind of terrifying phenomenon of people who vanish into thin air, sometimes in front of multiple witnesses and sometimes without a trace. So let's start with a story that's often dismissed as folklore, but has stuck around for a really long time, like 150 years. This is the case of Charles Ashmore Jr., and he was from Quincy, Illinois. This took place in the winter of 1878, which was a very cold and snowy winter. The Ashmore farm had a stream somewhere between 50 to 100 feet from the home. They had no indoor plumbing, so water had to be carried from the stream a short walk away from the house. The night that this disappearance occurred, Charles Jr. volunteered to go fetch water from the stream. He grabbed a pail, bundled up, and stepped outside. Then, a few moments later, the family heard him call out. So at first, they thought maybe he slipped or dropped the pail, but the tone of his voice sounded different. It sounded really distant and far away, like it was coming from somewhere else. And then it just went quiet. Alarmed, the family rushed outside. The snow was untouched except for Charles' footprints leading away from the house. The path was clear. His prints moved in a straight line through the yard toward the stream, and then they just stopped abruptly. There was no return trail or a sign of struggle. The prints just ended mid-step, as if he had been lifted off the ground and pulled into the sky. They called his name and searched for him for hours. Days passed, but the family claimed they could still hear him faintly calling out from some place they couldn't see. His voice would fade in and out like he was trapped in a space that they couldn't get to. Some speculated that this story was a hoax invented by Ambrose Bierce, who was a mystery writer, or perhaps this was a retelling inspired by one of Bierce's fictional tales. But others, including researchers into strange disappearances and high strangeness, have continued to bring it up. It does match a very specific pattern that shows up again and again in historical records and in eyewitness testimony. One moment a person is there, and the next they've just vanished. Let's move on to another story, one with even more witnesses and a lot more confusion. This one is wild because unlike the Ashmore case, this story had multiple witnesses. So this is the case of David Lang, who was a Tennessee farmer who vanished in front of 5 people in broad daylight. It was the afternoon of September 23rd, 1880. David Lang was on his property in Gatlin, Tennessee. His wife and 2 young children were in the front yard. They were expecting a couple guests, Judge August Peck and his traveling companion, who were arriving by horse and buggy. As the buggy pulled up, David started walking across the pasture to greet them. And then, without warning, he just disappeared. He was mid-step on flat terrain when, according to 5 people watching, including his own wife and children, he simply ceased to exist. One moment he was there, and the next he just wasn't. Seeing this disappearance before her very eyes, his wife screamed. The children burst into tears, and the judge jumped down from the buggy and ran toward where David was, thinking maybe he had fallen into some kind of hole. But there was nothing there. There was no hole and no place to fall into or to hide. There was no sign that David had been there at all, except they had all just watched him take those final steps before vanishing. The search began immediately. Neighbors, townspeople, and officials scoured the property. They poked and dug into the ground. They even brought in bloodhounds. But the dogs couldn't catch a scent. There were no footprints past the spot where he'd vanished, and there was no broken grass or branches to suggest he'd run or been taken. It was as if the world had glitched and David Lang had just walked right out of it. This story does get a little stranger. In the days that followed, the Lang family claimed that they could hear his voice faint and calling out from the place where he had disappeared. It was distant and muffled, as though he was shouting through a wall or from underground, or maybe from another dimension. And then, just like his physical body, his voice disappeared and was never heard again. David Lang was never found. Skeptics have tried to debunk this one for many years. The first story gained attention after being published in the San Francisco Chronicle decades later, and some believe that it was a work of fiction passed off as a real event. But whether true or not, this story is a lot like Charles Ashmore's, someone vanishing into thin air in front of multiple witnesses who have no reason to lie and nothing to gain. However, this story is also very similar to Ambrose Bierce's story called The Difficulty of Crossing a Field from 1888. This story, though, involves the disappearance of a Mr. Williamson, not David Lang. Now, if the Charles Ashmore and David Lang stories are works of fiction, they are incredibly specific, and they seem to resonate with documented cases that are undeniably real, like the story of Owen Parfitt, a man who, unlike Charles or David, couldn't have walked away even if he wanted to. This one takes place even earlier, in 1768, and this happened in a town called Shepton Mallet in England. Owen Parfitt was an older man, and he was confined to a chair outside of his sister's home. He was paralyzed, and he was not able to walk. His sister had stepped inside for a few minutes while Owen had sat out front enjoying the summer sun. A neighbor passed by and saw him sitting there, but when his sister returned not long after, he was gone. No one saw him leave, and more importantly, he couldn't have left on his own. He was unable to walk, and he was even unable to stand. And yet the chair was undisturbed, as if someone had plucked him from it, and he vanished without touching anything else. A search was launched. Townfolk were confused, people scoured the area. There were no wheel marks, no drag marks, and there were no signs that anyone had carried him away. His sister was beside herself. Owen never returned, and his body was never found. The case of Owen Parfitt was never solved. Centuries later, the story still pops up in paranormal discussion forums and historical mystery lists because, again, this is not just a regular disappearance. This was a man who simply blinked out of the world without an explanation. It's not just the older, hard-to-verify stories that fit this pattern. There are modern reports, too. There are first-hand accounts from people alive today who claim to have seen it happen. One story was posted to Reddit by a user who swore up and down that they and their friend watched a man walk into a restroom stall and never come back out. They'd been sitting near the entrance to a beachside public restroom. A man walked in. They saw him clearly. He entered one of the stalls, shut the door, and sat down. They kept chatting, and a few minutes passed, and then more. At some point, they noticed that the stall hadn't opened again, so they peeked under the door to check. No one was there. The stall was empty. There was no way he could have climbed or snuck out without them seeing. He would have had to walk directly past them, but he didn't. He just wasn't there anymore. Another Redditor posted a story about walking through a quiet suburban street in Leicestershire, England. They were passing a man dressed oddly. He was wearing outdated clothing, a strange hat, and didn't seem to fit the current era. The witness looked away briefly to check their phone, and when they looked back up, the man was gone. There was nowhere he could have ducked into, no alleyways, no cars, no sound of movement. He was just gone. The witness didn't believe in anything paranormal at the time, but the moment stuck with them ever since. These modern accounts might not be verifiable, but they all have the same pattern: sudden, inexplicable disappearances that seem to defy the laws of physics and logic. And there are hundreds of them, scattered across forums, journals, old newspapers, and even government documentaries. And if you are into true crime, this brings to mind the case of Maura Murray. She also disappeared in front of multiple witnesses, though not really in the same type of way as some of these more historical ones. Maura Murray was involved in a car accident in New Hampshire, and there's a lot of speculation around why she was there to begin with. I did cover this a long time ago because it's always been one of the most intriguing disappearances to me. After her car accident, she was being watched by a couple from their home who had called the police to report her accident, and they looked away for a moment and she was gone within a really tight window. I believe they narrowed it down to maybe 3 to 5 minutes. So these stories remind me of her, as well as Brian Schaefer. The bathroom story reminds me of him because he disappeared from a bar. So there was CCTV footage of him going into the bar with his friends, and after walking away from his friends in the bar, they never saw him again. There was only one way in and one way out. The back entrance to the bar was blocked off because there was, I believe, construction or something going on out back. So these stories still do happen, and you'll find them a lot in true crime circles. Those are the two modern disappearance mysteries that I find most intriguing. Theories range from scientific to supernatural. Some believe we live in a multiverse where dimensions occasionally overlap or bleed into one another. And maybe when that happens, someone steps into the wrong spot at the wrong time and ends up somewhere else entirely. Others believe that these people are pulled through rips in space-time, accidents of quantum physics. This idea is that under certain circumstances, especially in areas with high electromagnetic activity or maybe even geological anomalies, the fabric of reality becomes thin. A person might pass through that thin spot and essentially glitch out of reality that they were once in. This is my theory on the missing 911 phenomena, where there's a ton of missing people in our national parks. One of my theories has always been that there is electromagnetic anomalies in the parks, and that's why they've been protected and not ever built up, and could be why so many people go missing in our national parks. There's even a theory that ties into the simulation hypothesis. This is the idea that we're all living in a computer-generated reality, and sometimes a player or asset is simply removed, the render fails, or the code is rewritten, and the person disappears without explanation. These stories have been around for hundreds of years, and they all sound eerily similar. They seem to happen in different countries, different time periods, and different kinds of people, but it's always the same pattern. Can all of these stories be chalked up to mental illness, coincidence, foul play, or lies? If any of these stories did actually happen, we might begin to question the very basis of reality itself. I hope you liked today's glitch in the matrix, and I'd love to hear your glitches in the comments below. Again, if you want to support this show, the quickest way is a like and subscribe, and if you're called to it, memberships are open. Some of you have reached out asking me for readings, and if you didn't know, I do have a degree in metaphysics, specifically psychics and counseling, and I do have a small spiritual advising practice on the side. So if you're interested in meeting with me, either to get a reading or advising, I am doing 10% off for Wicked Mysterious's 3rd birthday. So you can go over to my website and book a reading between now and Halloween and get 10% off with promo code BIRTHDAY99. Don't forget to click the bell so that you never miss a mystery. I'll see you again soon, and stay mysterious.